All right, welcome back. We are going to cover the judgments of God, part one, Nashville and nuclear game theory. Will Nashville get hit by a nuke? We're going to find out the answer here and now. This Bible study is brought to you by Protestant Church Ministries. You can find more Bible studies at protestantchurch.org. This is part one of a, so far, four-part series that we are put together systematically to explain the importance of the Nashville warning message, the impetus of the judgments of God in all of Scripture and how they culminate again at the end of time, and the significant relevance of as in the days of Lot, quoting Luke chapter 17 and verse 21, where the Dr. Luke identifies the situation of Sodom and Gomorrah to be repeated again at the end of time. And we're going to look at parallels between Sodom and Gomorrah. But this one here, we're going to look at game theory, which is something taught in political science. It's taught in United States warfare and game tactics. It's something that's been derived from Sun Tzu's Art of War. And due to recent developments of the prediction made by Jeff Pippinger and his ministry out of the state of Arkansas, he was able to successfully publish a full-page article in the Tennessean newspaper where he predicts that Nashville will be destroyed by a nuclear warhead instigated by, caused by involvement of a radical Islamic group on an attack of U.S. soil, particularly and namely the city of Nashville. And he goes even farther and predicts the date of July 18th, 2020. So we have to examine that claim, number one, and number two, we're going to approach it with rational thought and systematic theology. And so I am so excited for this study. Without further ado, we're going to go through it. So far, we have been covering the judgments of God in all of Scripture. That has been our theme this quarter. We started in Genesis and we looked at the judgments of God in the days of Noah. Matthew 24 says, as in the days of Noah, so shall they be also in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. And so there are significant lessons both of judgment, but here also of salvation concerning Noah and his family, and the salvation, how it applies to us again at the end of time, and the importance of having that special ark. Then we looked at the judgments of God in Nineveh, and how Jonah had to give them a warning message. Now, there they were given a 40-day prophecy that God will overthrow them within 40 days if they do not repent, but Nineveh repented. However, there were deeper lessons here in Nineveh that is very important for the reader to understand concerning how God operates in allowing judgments to fall on the earth. Another example where a city received judgment was the city of Jericho. And this is an important story where the children of Israel marched around Jericho for 7 days, and on the seventh day, Sabbath, they marched around on the seventh day 7 more laps, and with 7 priests holding the Ark of the Covenant, housing the 10 Commandments of God, and those 7 priests blowed 7 trumpets on the 7th lap, and there was a loud cry, and the walls came tumbling down. So it's 7 by 7 by 7 by 7 pattern there in the story of Jericho. And it was behold the sound, which was the cry that Joshua records taking place there as the judgment came. There was a loud cry associated with it. Very important. Then we look at the judgments upon Jerusalem through the visitation of Jesus Christ. When Jesus was there in the flesh, he brought forward and reminded the Jews of the prophecies of Daniel chapter 9 that Jerusalem would be destroyed at this end if they refused the Messiah, rejecting the Son of God. And Jesus reminds them in Matthew 24 the events of the destruction of Jerusalem with the abomination of desolation. And there is an important lesson there, how that history will be repeated again on a larger world scene. And that's very important. And because Jesus predicted a prophecy against his own town, the Pharisees called Jesus a heretic, and they did everything to undermine his authority. But Jesus had nothing wrong. And more importantly, neither his prophetic judgment was incorrect, and neither were his doctrinal teachings. He was doctrinally sound. But this is what made the Pharisees hate him even more. He was bulletproof, and they couldn't touch him in terms of his doctrine that he taught concerning salvation, the study of soteriology, how we are saved. Jesus' doctrine was perfect. Now, here you would think heretic might be spelt wrong, but it's not. That's the way it's spelled in the King James, especially in Titus chapter 3. And if you don't understand the meaning of this word, that's the purpose of this Bible study. Who is the real heretic in the Bible? And what must we prepare for in the closing scenes of Earth's history? That's a very important study concerning doctrine and salvation and judgment, which culminates all of these studies together, which leads us to our study on Nashville. And we're going to relate it here to, we're going to discuss game theory in part 1. We're going to discuss the hidden history of Nashville in part 2. And part 3, we're going to look at a verse-by-verse type-antitype fulfillment of a particular city in the Bible, with the prophetic city here mentioned, which is Nashville. And part 4, we're going to go over the drone perspective of the entire event in terms of the second coming of Jesus Christ and end-time eschatology, which is something nobody has done, and it is very important. And we have some amazing stuff to share with all of you. And so you should be very excited. You can tell the excitement in my voice. So I'm going to go through, Ellen White had 3 visions from the year 1904 to the year 1905. Also, following the Nashville study, these 4-part series, we're going to begin delineating and producing out defending the Lord's prophet. And so we're going to explain why Ellen White is a true prophet, and we're going to use the entire Bible to show it. We're not going to let any one objection be left unanswered, and we're going to examine a multitude of Scripture and show how it harmonizes together. Remember, Scripture is a system of truth that together paints a 3-dimensional picture of our salvation and what we need to know concerning the end of times, including having a prophet. So, Mrs. White says in the year 1904, manuscript 154, paragraph 36, while I was in Nashville, very important, she was in Nashville, a scene was opened before me. A great ball of fire seemed to fall from heaven, and from it went forth flashes of light. When these flashes of light would strike a building, the building would burn like tinder. So here, building. And then I heard someone say, I knew this was coming. These are the judgments of God that I knew were coming. You knew, said another. You were my neighbor. Why did you not tell me that these things were coming? Why did you not warn others? It's very interesting. So here it was the destruction of a building. These buildings would be hit and they would fall like tinder. And it was clearly identified as a judgment of God. Nobody said this was a terrorist attack. A judgment of God is generally something supernatural that can't be explained by natural occurring things, or terrorism is not naturally occurring. It can't be. It's not related to an act of man. It's related to here by an act of God. So that's the first clue. Second, 1905, the next year, when I was at Nashville again, she's visiting Nashville again a year later. I had been speaking to the people, and in the night season, during the night, there was an immense ball of fire that came right from heaven and settled in Nashville. So this settles beyond any doubt that there should be no confusion regarding where this fireball is going to land. It's going to hit Nashville. She says it is settled in Nashville. That is as plain as the prophet can make it. As plain as possible. It's settled directly in Nashville. She said there were flames going out like arrows from the ball. Houses were being consumed. Houses tottering and falling. So note here, this time now she sees more, and houses are even destroyed by this fireball from heaven. Here she says buildings, so it makes you think of downtown Nashville. But here she says homes, houses, people where people live. So this means the event is going to be cataclysmic enough to not only affect the downtown sky rises, like the AT&T building, but it's also going to affect the suburbs immediately surrounding Nashville proper. She goes on, some of our people were standing there. Our people. These are those who knew about the vision. These are the Seventh-day Adventists. Some of them were still there. They didn't all leave. It was just as we expected, they said. We expected this. So they foreknew before it happened. They believed in the vision of the prophecy. People told them, and they knew it was coming. Others were wringing their heads in agony and crying to God for favor. Others, as in those who were not our people, so the non-Adventists. You knew this was coming, they said. You knew that this was coming and never said a word to warn us. They seemed as though they would almost tear them to pieces to think they had never told them or given them any warning at all. So the problem here is those living in Nashville are not the one giving the warning. There are people all around the world reading this and saying, wake up, Nashville, get out now, because it's coming, you need to realize it. But the people in Nashville are asleep. They're not aware of it until after the fact, and many of them will die. Some Adventists, some non-Adventists will all lose their lives in this event who do not listen. Here again in 1904, so this is the third and final vision concerning Nashville. So over 2 years, Ellen White has 3 visions concerning the destruction of the city of Nashville by a fireball from heaven that rains down out of heaven as fire and brimstone, or she describes an immense ball of fire. So the scene was presented before me. It was the night before the Sabbath. That is when the scene was presented. I looked out of the window, and there was an immense ball of fire that had come from heaven, and it fell where they were casting buildings with pillars. Especially the pillars were presented to me. So the pillars here, there is a historic and iconic building in Nashville surrounded with gigantic pillars today. And we're going to address that a little bit further in part 2, the hidden history of Nashville. So stay tuned for that. Right now, we're addressing the nuclear prediction of Nashville. We're going to examine that first. But there is a place where they were casting pillars, and these pillars were especially drawn to Mrs. White's attention. And it seemed as if the fireball came right to the building and crushed it. And they saw that it was branching out. So something about this building where the pillars are is so horrible that God allows it to be directly targeted as a judgment of God. And it says it enlarged, and they began to cry and mourn, and they wrung their hands. And I saw some of the people stood by there saying, well, it was just as what we had been expecting. Again, our people said we knew it was coming. It was just what we had been talking about. It is just what we had been talking about. So lots of conversation after it happens, probably in every news coverage outlet in the known world. And others said, you knew this, and never told us about it. I thought there was so much agony in their face, such an agony in their appearance. Could you imagine your neighbor's not Adventist, your neighbor does not know Nashville's getting destroyed. You know it's getting destroyed. You get your kids out of the city and your family saved, but you don't tell your neighbor, and they lose their wife or their husband or their children or their parents because you didn't tell them. Yeah, that's on you. Read Exodus chapter 33 about what it means to warn your neighbor. Very important lesson the Bible teaches us. And Ezekiel chapter 3, verse 16, 17. And Ezekiel 33 also reiterates it. So how do we know it was Nashville as the city in her vision? Well, Mrs. White had a mode of operandi. She had a phonetic pattern of linguistics that always associated any vision she gave, and her wording was always the same. And we know this to be true because other visions she had, such as New York City getting hit with the Twin Towers, occurred in the same phonetic linguistic pattern. She says, while I was in the night season in New York City, God had shown me these buildings going up story after story and that they were to be destroyed. Testimonies to Church, Volume 9, page 11. Hint, hint. It was significant. She also writes about when she was in Loma Linda, California, how God showed her while I was in Loma Linda in the night season that God showed me this is where we must build our school, our medical school, and it should be this, this, and this. While she was in Chicago, God had shown me that while I was in the city in the night season, Chicago would be destroyed by a fire. She says, when visiting San Francisco, I was shown that terrible judgments would take place here, for they had opened up the liquor bars and the saloons again, and God was not happy, and there was a mighty earthquake there soon after. So every time she gives these visions, she is visiting the city. And number two, she mentions the city by name. And number three, either a blessing is given from the vision or a judgment is given from the vision as a warning. Most of them are warnings, but for example, in Melinda, it was a nice thing said about it. She has one about Collegedale, Tennessee, a nice thing was said about it. She has one that's also yet not fulfilled, which is the Copenhagen city in the country of Denmark. They are also prophesied to have a fireball from heaven destroy Copenhagen. So those of you in Copenhagen, just remember that. There's less said about you all, but she has 3 visions about Nashville, and the heat is definitely rising in Nashville, so it's much more pressing, I believe. So big deal. Now, the ministry said that on July 18th, 2020, a nuclear bomb by a Muslim community will be detonated over the city of Nashville. Well, here's what we know. Mrs. Weiss said in the year 1906, so she had the 3 visions, 1904, spring, fall, then again in 1905, 3 consecutive visions. In the year 1906, letter 158, Mrs. White says the following regarding the duty of his people to get out of the city. The Lord calls for his people to locate away from the cities, for in such an hour as you all think not, fire and brimstone will be rained from heaven upon these cities. Location and of origin, heaven, not another country, not a man-made country on earth. Location of origin, heaven. Fire will come from heaven. When one city is destroyed, notice now she's specific because it has to have a point of origin for when the judgments of God fall. Do not do this. Let not our people regard this matter as a light affair and think that they may, if favorable opportunity offers, build themselves homes in that same destroyed city. So she's telling you, when this event happens, when this city is destroyed by fire from heaven, don't go back and build your houses there. Don't go back and open your business there. She says there will be a favorable opportunity, and what she's referring to is eminent domain law in the United States Federal Code. Eminent domain law states, for example, in New Orleans with Hurricane Katrina, when a land is destroyed by, quote, on the insurance it reads as an act of God, a judgment of God, that land can be sold below fair trade market value to investors, developers, and real estate builders to take that city and that land that's been destroyed and to re-commercialize it, to rebuild it up, to build new businesses there, to open up suburban housing complexes, to bring people back into that area to make a profit. And she's saying when this city gets destroyed, 1 year after 3 visions given to her by Nashville getting destroyed, she says, don't go and build your house back in Nashville. She says, because it's not because it's going to get hit a second time, but because time at that point will be so short that you should not be concerned about building a house and establishing yourself and living out your life and a career. Time will be so short at that point that nothing else will matter except getting the gospel message out. And so if it was destroyed by a nuclear bomb, nobody would be going and building their house there. And here's the evidence. You look at Chernobyl, you look at Fukushima, nobody has rebuilt ever in Chernobyl, and Fukushima has taken over 80 years to be rebuilt. And they are still devastated with congenital birth defects, higher rates of cancer, and many other diseases. Nuclear radiation is extraordinarily toxic. You can look at these malformed infants coming out of the womb. They had many, many birth defects. This child here, his organs was switched on either side, and he had malformed injuries and acromegaly, long extended arms, encephalitis, malformed head. This child here, you see the formation, the things that it has had. So our bodies are especially exposed to radiation damage, and the size of the dose or the amount of energy deposited into the body is the most significant during a nuclear event. And the ability of the irradiation to harm human tissue. Our human tissues are all varying degrees of susceptibility to radiation. The skin is more susceptible to UV radiation than, per se, the brain. Our skin has the ability to reverse UV damage in our tissues. There is a thing called thiamine dimerization, which happens under UV radiation, and we have enzymes to reverse those thiamine dimers to prevent cancer from forming in our skin cells. There's many other forms, but this isn't the platform to get into cancer pathophysiology. But know that radiation causes these kinds of harmful effects, and the dose is the most direct amount. It affects the hair, causes baldness, clumping of hair to fall out. These are all germ lines where there's really fast-growing tissues. These cells that use the most energy will take up the most radiation rapidly, and they will experience the highest degrees of genetic mutations. The brain can kill brain nerves, cause neuropathies, vasospasms, seizures, and even immediate death to the brain. Brain cancer. Glioblastoma is one of the fastest growing brain cancers, hardest to treat. Thyroid. The thyroid takes up iodine, and during a nuclear explosion, there is what is called radioactive iodine in the air, and we rapidly absorb iodine in the atmosphere, as well as through our GI tract. And in sufficient amounts, radioactive iodine binds to the thyroid receptors, and they destroy the thyroid. The thyroid gets destroyed by the radiation coming off of the iodine. So under nuclear fallout, what you should do is take potassium iodide pills, and these overcrowd those thyroid receptors, and they outcompete against the radioactive iodine. And so instead of the radioactive iodine binding, the potassium iodide binds to your thyroid, protecting it from nuclear radiation. So that's something that you find in these nuclear radiation kits, is potassium iodide. Also, the heart can cause immediately cardiovascular event, heart failure, destroys the small vessels, etc. The blood system, it destroys the blood cell lymphocytes, it destroys leukocytes, it makes you susceptible to many other diseases, and it can persist in the body for up to 10 years after being exposed to this kind of radiation. Gastrointestinal tract disabilities, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. You'll have bloody stools, bloody vomiting, constant sickness. It messes up the equilibrium in the inner ear. You will constantly be sick and throwing up, and you could die of even nutrient malnutrition because you can't absorb any of the stuff you're putting in your body. It goes straight through you, or you reject it entirely. Which can cause painful way to live. And of course, the reproductive tract, these are another germ line in the body that's rapidly dividing. And so these areas will become sterile, or you'll have cancer in these areas as well. Very important. So one of the places the U.S. did nuclear testing, and this is important because there's a lesson to be learned here, was the coastal Marshall Island of Atoll. It was Bikini Lagoon's island that was chosen for the first nuclear test site after World War II. Its use ended with the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which forbade atmospheric testing. They found out it was literally devastating the ecosystem, even in the atmosphere, and it was like blowing east, getting caught in the Gulf Stream, and making people sick. Atoll is a coral reef in the Marshall Islands consisting of 23 islands. The atoll's inhabitants were relocated in 1946 before blasting began, and they continued to do nuclear bomb testing here until the year 1958, when they were finally told to stop. Now, the largest bomb that the U.S. has detonated was called the Castle Bravo bomb, and it was a lithium deuteride-fueled nuclear weapon. Lithium is a very oxidative metal on the periodic table that responds with oxygen, forms lithium oxide, and deuteride, which is a form of hydrogen with 2 neutrons. Deuter means 2. Hydrogen is 1 proton, 1 neutron, and if you put 2 neutrons, you increase the molecular weight, but you keep the 1 atomic proton, and so it becomes deuteride, and it has an extra neutron to react with lithium in this reaction, and it forms a thermonuclear weapon. So Castle Bravo's yield was actually 15 megatons of TNT. So over here is the little model of TNT. TNT stands for trinitrotoluene. Right here you have a benzene ring here, and these 3 rings in here show resonance, that those electrons are cycling inside of this ring like this, sharing that electrical charge of that structure, making it highly reactive with anything going on there. Then what you have is a methyl group here, and when you bind a methyl group to a benzene ring, it becomes toluene, becomes the new chemical name toluene. And then what the chemist does is he binds 3 nitrate groups. This is your first carbon here, carbon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you have a nitrite group on carbon 2, carbon 4, and carbon 6. So 2,4,6 trinitrotoluene is the chemical name for TNT. However, the Castle Bravo bomb was 15 megaton equivalents of TNT. They initially thought it was only 6 megatons, but there was unforeseen additional reactions involving the lithium due to its high reactivity with the deuteride. And so it was twice as powerful, more than twice as powerful, when it blew up in the Bikini Atoll Island. Most powerful artificial explosion in history. 3 families were resettled on the Bikini Island in 1970. So we're examining why Nashville, according to the vision of Ellen White, will not be hit by a nuclear warhead. Because she says the next year, everybody is going to be tempted to move back there and relocate there because it's going to be very profitable to buy land for cheap and to get back into that real estate and housing market. If it was a nuclear warhead, no developer is going to rebuild and put a housing community there. There's no housing communities in Chernobyl, and there's no housing communities here in Atoll, and I'm showing you that. So 100 residents moved there in 1970, 20 years after the fallout. But scientists went back and they measured levels of strontium, which were dangerously high in the water in 1977, and they took blood samples from the residents, hair samples, bone marrow samples, and found cesium-137, which is its atomic number. Atomic number for cesium is very radioactive in their bodies. And so they were all evacuated in 1980. So it's completely unoccupied today, 50 years later. So I want to show you this video, and then we're going to look at something here in closing on nuclear game theory. So here's footage from the Washington Post from the 1946 atomic bomb testing in the Atoll Island. Here's the timer.
The awful roar of the blast, equal to a discharge of 60,000 depth charges, each weighing 600 pounds, strikes the ears of the observers. Many miles away, the raging might of searing flame, crushing force, and deadly radioactive water is seen falling in a killing mist as a great circular wall of sea closes in on the guinea pig fleet. The combined forces let loose, swamp the nearby ships, and crush their thickly armored hulls like cardboard. Seen from the air, the towering waves set in motion appear to be only shallow ripples. The beach at Bikini gets a pounding. A television screen records an on-the-spot picture story. Drone planes fly through the turbulent air mass above Bikini Lagoon, deadly with its radioactive gases. And for days it was not safe for salvage crews to board the damaged ships. Geiger counters recorded the intense rays, which would have proved fatal if the ships had been manned. When task force observers under Admiral Blandy made the final tally of ships sunk or damaged, they found the Jap battleship Nagato badly damaged. She later sank. The destroyer Hughes was beached to prevent its sinking. 5 submarines were listed as sunk or damaged, and the historic old battleship New York was a battered hulk, its superstructure twisted and torn. The proud Saratoga, veteran of many naval campaigns, goes down many hours after the blast. Efforts were made to salvage the historic carrier the Japs could never sink, but old Sarah finally goes down in the cause of science. And now are shown the most dramatic pictures of the underwater blast, taken from a photographic plane. Here is the motion picture spectacle of all time. Tons of water, alive with deadly rays. Awe-inspiring in its significance for man, who learned how to control the atom, but must now learn to control himself.
Before you can integrate all your apps and data.
So that was very important for us to see how the nuclear bomb was launched, the effects on the ocean, the life around it, and why this area has been uninhabitable for over the last 70 years now. And so we know for certain that it cannot be a nuclear bomb that attacks Nashville. It will be a fireball from heaven, as the vision says. So in closing, we're going to look at nuclear warfare. And one of the things that you have to learn about in governance and politics and military is game theory, which is an umbrella term. And underneath it, we have something called deterrence theory, which holds that nuclear weapons are intended to deter other states from attacking with their nuclear weapons. Hence the name deterrent, through the promised retaliation and possibly mutually assured destruction, MAD. So over here you have how bombs are increasing in size. Now over here, this is the Tsar Bomba. It's 50 megaton. It's never been detonated, and I'm pretty sure it's retired in a museum. And if there's any equivalence left, I can assure you the United States, the CIA, and all other intelligence agencies are highly monitoring where this is. And if Russia even sneezes in the direction of the button of the Tsar Bomba, the United States knows about it. I can assure you that. Over here was the Castle Bravo, a 15 megaton bomb detonated in 1951. So here's how there's Mount Everest, the height of a plane, 35,000 feet. The average plume cloud is over 100 feet, 1,000 feet tall. And here are the very first bomb we launched on Hiroshima in Japan in 1945. And so game theory kind of works like this. There are ones and zeros here. There are binary options for the United States, for Soviet Russia, or substitute any group here with nuclear capacity. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, there were two options for either party. The Soviet Russia got their missiles into Cuba, and they could either withdraw them or deploy them, in which case an outcome would catalyze here in the grid. And the United States had an option to either do nothing or to confront them. And to confront means to get them to get rid of all missiles in Cuba, so they can never threaten the United States. And so in which case, if Soviet Russia withdrew their missiles and the U.S. did nothing, there would be a tie between both parties. Soviet neither lost nor won. The U.S. suffered no civilian death. So it was like no harm, no foul. Here, and nobody had to get involved. The Soviet Russia could deploy the missiles, and the U.S. could do nothing, in which case the U.S. would lose and the Soviet Union would win. On the other side, you could say Soviet, which is what we want, the U.S. confronts the Soviet Union, and they would win under the stipulation that Soviet Russia would withdraw their missiles, which would be a lose for Russia. In which case, this is actually the block that occurred in history. However, the one that we want to avoid is quadrant number 4, in which case there is a confrontation, but the missiles are still deployed in a warfare fashion, in which case one firing of a nuclear warhead leads to the second firing of a nuclear warhead, which in this case you employ MAD, mutually assured destruction. And so this is game theory in nuclear warfare. So we know for certain, will Nashville be prophetically destroyed by a nuclear warhead? Absolutely not. That's not what the vision says. That has never been the case. The event will be like Sodom and Gomorrah, where the message will be given to them. God's people will be safely removed at that point who heed the message, and the city will undergo some kind of supernatural event or a fireball falls from heaven under God's control and God's control alone, not any organization or group on the face of the earth will allow this to happen. It will be by God himself. Now, remember, it was considered a judgment of God in Mrs. White's vision. You can go back and look at it. That means no rational or secular thought can explain such as simply calling it an act of terrorism. Now, I know people in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I know people who have associates in the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, who have positions in Washington, who have positions in Maryland, who have positions in very high intelligence agencies that I have been in communication with. And I can assure you, the U.S.'s approach to defending and keeping the American people safe is the best defense is a good defense and also a good offense. There is no part of the American infrastructure or shield around America that is weak. We have ways to tell where every nuke in any silo is in the known world from any country possessing a nuclear warhead. The moment any one of these nukes are even activated or a launch code is initiated, the U.S. is immediately alerted, and we have technology today surrounding this invisible shield on both the East Coast and the West Coast, where no warhead could even come close to getting over U.S. soil at all. It would be, and even from a nation like Russia or China, who may have billions of dollars to try something, much less a radical group, perhaps in the Middle East with a much smaller budget. It's absolutely impossible that a nuke could get into the U.S. this way. And part of our defense system now, today, involves the use of hypersonic warheads. And if you don't know about those, I suggest you do your research, because it's quite fascinating. And again, the best defense truly is an excellent defense in our case. So, stay tuned for part 2, The Judgments of God, Nashville's Hidden History. In this next episode, we're going to look at just exactly why God revealed to his prophet and his people why the city of Nashville will be destroyed. And there is truly a significant reason why. There's multiple reasons why. They have a very dark history, and we're going to divulge all of that in this next episode, part 2. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching.